Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this panel, Fret Not, Guitars, Materials and Nature. I'm Fanny Calder. I'm the executive director of a non-profit called Murmur. We're based in the UK, as you can probably tell from my accent, but we work globally, which is why we're very happy to be here. And our mission is very much about working quietly behind the scenes to help the music industry support artists to use their voice on climate and to leverage the incredible cultural power of music to put climate change back at the center of our conversation culturally worldwide. We're pretty new. I'm not going to talk much about what we do, but I just want to explain why I was here. We have an amazing panel here to talk about acoustic guitars. So I'm going to ask everybody to start off by introducing themselves, but also I'm going to ask them to kick off by explaining why they love acoustic guitars so much. There's a lot of love in this panel. There's a lot of emotion, even though this is a sustainability panel. We wanted to center that. So that's the question we're going to kick off with. Adam, can I start with you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Gardner. I'm a co-founder and co-executive director of a nonprofit called Reverb that works in the intersection of music and the environment. We've been doing it for 20 plus years now. Oh, why I love acoustic guitars. I also play in the band Guster and been touring for 30 plus years. And I started playing on the acoustic guitar before moving to electric guitars and other instruments. But there's something about, even when you're playing a large stage and there's a band all around you, you can still feel the vibrations of the instrument against your body, and it resonates. You're part of the resonation of that instrument. So I just love the way it feels to play an acoustic guitar.
Thank you, Jacob.
My name's Jacob. I play in the band Young the Giant. I play guitar, and we've worked with Reverb over the years to move our tours in a greener pathway forward. And I love acoustic guitars. I grew up playing electric, but it wasn't until I picked up, I got a Taylor from my mom and dad years ago. They make you work just a little bit harder to get the results out of them. I think when I'm writing as a songwriter or producer, I do generally start on the acoustic. I think it kind of pulls out of you like the true essence of what you're trying to get at. You can't hide behind too much. And I think once you have your top line and your accompaniment, all the bells and whistles are very easy to put on afterwards, but to work backwards is usually a lot more difficult. So.
My name is Scott Paul. I'm the director of sustainability at Taylor Guitars. I am by far the least musically talented person on this stage right now. So why I like guitars as a lifelong environmental policy and advocacy person is an acoustic guitar in particular historically is wholly dependent upon healthy ecosystems, intact old-growth forests from all around the planet. And as an activist, I've used a lot of props, plywood, toilet paper, palm oil, lots of props. Nothing connects like an acoustic guitar. Red states and blue states love it equally. It transcends culture, it transcends language. So as a person who is more of an activist than a musician, to put it lightly, an acoustic guitar to me is the sword Excalibur. It is the vehicle that I can capture people's undivided attention to give an environmental story more so than any other object I've ever encountered.
My name is John McElroy. I'm the general counsel and leader of the company's sustainability efforts at C.F. Martin & Co. in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. We're the world's oldest flat-top steel string acoustic guitar maker, and I am the luckiest attorney in the world because I get to marry my very long passion for all things guitar with my career as a lawyer. And I've been a guitar fanatic since I was 16 years old. And as far as there's few things more fun than plugging in a electric guitar into a loud amp, but there's something very personal and intimate about an acoustic guitar, and there's really nowhere to hide when you got an acoustic guitar. It's just you, your fingers, and the strings, and the wood.
Thank you. And I think the reason we started with that is I wanted you to understand that we've got a panel here who are really connected to the instruments we're talking about, not just because they play on them, but also because they make them. And we're going to tell you a story of what is difficult, what the challenges that the industry is facing, and hopefully we'll end up thinking about how tackling these challenges is a part of a wider story about how musicians can use their voice and their influence to drive change. But we're going to start by really focusing on the very specific issues that are related to guitars. But in order to do that, we need to understand what an acoustic guitar is made of. So I'm going to ask Scott, can you tell us what a truly great acoustic guitar is made of?
So the average acoustic guitar is made up of 5 or 6 different species, some tropical, some temperate. Each species was selected to perform a very specific mechanical function as a part. So you have your soundboard, and has to be strong. And hold on, I put something on my, lightweight, strong, and flexible. I wrote on my hand so I could forget who did that. The back and sides have to be reflective. The neck can't warp, to oversimplify. The fingerboard, very, very thin. Add insult to injury, you cut these fret tracks. That thing has to hold that fret in time for a long time. So only certain species can perform these mechanical functions. There's something like 73,000 species of tree on the planet. There's maybe like 50 that are commonly used to make musical instruments, because these species that we select, to be fair, part of it is tradition. You know, we've been building guitars for a long time, and customers think they've been trained to want certain species for their guitar, and that's something we can get into. But the species that we do select, not only have to they perform a mechanical function, because you're making a machine that is creating a wavelength, but it's got to dry well, it's got to cut well, it's got to sand well, it's got to bend well. It's got to react to machinery and handheld tools. So it's a bit of a torture.
It's got to look cool too.
And it's got to look cool. It's all got to come together, all of these parts, to produce the sound that you want to hear. And honestly, there's not a lot of species that can handle the test. There are certainly more than the industry is currently using, and we would like to get into that topic of alternative species and alternative material, but at the end of the day, an acoustic guitar, in the left side of your brain, it's a machine that makes a sonic wavelength. And we can influence that sonic wavelength and that sound by the materials we use and the design we use. On the right side of your brain, and this is where it gets more fun, because I'm dyslexic and I favor my right side of my brain, it's a human storytelling machine. As Adam says, you press it against your body, you release your most intimate passions and loves and loss on an instrument that is wholly dependent, historically, on healthy ecosystems around the planet. So if you like your guitar, maybe you should think about healthy ecosystems around the planet and how they're doing.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up before I come to John. Can you name the woods that are most commonly used? Because they've got such beautiful names.
So historically, the soundboard is spruce, for the same reason that airplane wings used to be made of spruce. Because if you used rosewood that we use for back and sides, which is reflective for an airplane wing, you'd get a lot of turbulence. So you have rosewood back and sides historically, you have spruce tops, you have mahogany necks, you have ebony fingerboards. And I'll say part of the problem that we're grappling with as an industry is that if you're...
That wasn't made of wood.
is we've done too good of a job for 100 years, 150 years, 175 years telling people, you know, if you want a real guitar, you need one with Brazilian rosewood and Adirondack top, and trust me, that makes a beautiful guitar. But a good craftsman can build a guitar that it becomes like ice cream or wine. There isn't, like, what's the best flavor of ice cream? I'm here to tell you it's vanilla, but that's my opinion. It's okay if you like chocolate or strawberry or Rocky Road. Don't listen to what the bloody marketers have been telling you, that a real guitar has got this collection of woods. You use your ear and pick. The guitar should pick you. You shouldn't pick the guitar.
Thank you. So taking the story on, those are extraordinarily beautiful trees that these guitars are made of. They're in trouble. John, could you tell us what the problems are and what governments are trying to do about them?
Absolutely. I would first add, though, that even though Taylor and Martin have very different design and build philosophies, and a Taylor sounds like a Taylor and a Martin sounds like a Martin sounds like a Martin. Excuse me.
Freudian slip.
Pun intended. No. All kidding aside, our guitars sound very different, but both our companies use primarily the same woods because of what Scott mentioned earlier with the tradition, and these woods were picked for a reason, probably in the 17 or 1800s. The problem that has presented itself, far more over the last 15 years or so, is that these the woods that the guitars, both of our companies are using, and pretty much every guitar company in the world is using, are pressured because they're coming from a lot of temperate and tropical zones. And as a result, some of these species are under pressure. Brazilian rosewood, you can't cut Brazilian rosewood down anymore. And as a result, we have to be much more careful about what woods we use and where we get them. But it is a delicate process because these woods were chosen for a reason. I could, even for the non-guitar players in the audience, if you took two Martins that were built exactly the same, or two Taylors, dare I say, that were built exactly the same, and you substituted out, the backs and sides, you'd hear the difference immediately. But because of the popularity of those species, they've become under a lot of regulatory pressure, whether it's from the CITES Act, which is the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species, which our guitar companies have to deal with all the time when we're importing raw wood and exporting finished guitars, or it's the European Union's deforestation regulation, which is really coming on strong of late. So those are problems we have to be very aware of, lest we run afoul of the regulatory people, which we don't want to do.
Thank you. And I'm assuming that everybody in this room is aligned that we know that governments need to act to protect this forest, that it's precious to us collectively. And so this story is something that's both about how do we encourage governments to act, and then how do the guitar makers respond to the challenges that government's action leads to. But before we get onto that, Adam, I know you've played a role in trying to support and drive government ambition on these issues. Could you share your story on that?
Sure. Yeah, I got pulled into this because I guess in 2011, 12, a certain manufacturer, not represented on the stage here tonight, got into trouble with importing some questionably legal wood. And our government at that time was heavily Tea Party leaning, and they were trying to gut this law called the Lacey Act. That was a really important law that's been helping the prevention of clear cutting of old growth forest around the world. And so I got a crash course on what was going on, and how, because musical instruments now got pulled into this discussion because of this, basically it was Fish and Wildlife Services had to go in and actually confiscate the wood from the manufacturer. So we were able to chime in. I actually ended up testifying to Congress with a number of musicians. At this time, we'd already been working as Reverb, making their tours greener and working with all these artists to do all these things to make, their work and their businesses more sustainable. Yet the very instruments that we were expressing ourselves through were being ripped out of old growth and rainforest by child and slave labor, and that was not okay. And we wanted to make sure that the instruments that we were playing were sourced legally at the minimum, and of course we want them to be sustainable. So I was able to go to Congress. I was the only one represented on that panel that was arguing to keep the law strong. Everyone else was like, oh, this is government overreach. So I was able to kind of, unbeknownst to me, see firsthand how powerful it was to actually have a chorus of musicians behind you. We had 30 plus musicians, Mick Jagger and Sting and all these people that were very big names and had very big followings, and were ready to tell their fans what the government decided that day. And so it was a pretty easy argument for me, because I said, listen, here are all the musicians that have said that they're not going to buy another wood instrument until they know it's legal. And they're also going to tell all their fans what you decide here today. We call them fans, you can call them voters. What are you going to do? And they just it stopped them in their tracks. So it was actually not that much effort, but had major impacts. Then later, we partnered with the Environmental Investigation Agency and took artists into the rainforests of Guatemala and Peru, two very different stories, and shot documentaries there. Guatemala was a very positive story in the Petén, and I know both of you. By the way, Martin and Taylor are leaders in this. I just want to say it if it's not obvious. I quoted both of your CEOs when I testified to Congress about it because they are very much on the right side of history here with this. Even though that they are traditional instrument makers and been in this a long time, they're innovators and they're on the right side of history. So I just want to say that. And so we went into the Petén and actually saw how the government there in Guatemala gave tracts of land to the communities that lived in those old growth forests to manage with the help of Rainforest Alliance sustainably the wood and wood products that they can get out of the forest so they can support themselves, make a living there, not have illegal logging be the way that they can make money, not that they're the same groups of people that were doing those things, but they were actually, we went and visited them and it was unbelievable what we saw. We actually, took us days to get there. We were floating upstream in a boat and all of a sudden we get deep into the rainforest there and we see these folks cutting backs and sides for Martin and Taylor and other guitar manufacturers. I couldn't believe it. And they actually had the shapes there. I was like, I knew exactly what the guitars were that they were building there. And meanwhile, these are local communities that are supporting themselves through this work. And you know that it's coming from a sustainable source and you're actually supporting individuals and families there. And we were able to talk to them. Peru, unfortunately, was the other side of the table where we met with indigenous communities whose leaders were murdered by illegal loggers. And some of them are actually still in exile today. And that was a very difficult conversation because the government based in Lima wasn't really paying attention to what was happening on the other side of the Andes Mountains at all. There was no prosecutions for these murderers. And we just listened carefully. So it was members of Dave Matthews Band, Maroon 5, KT Tunstall, and a Peruvian band called Kanaku y el Tigre. And we just heard their stories and documented them and actually played music with them, which was incredible. But it's a real problem down there, and it was just kind of the ugly side of it. And so while musical instruments aren't the primary driver for illegal logging, they're a high-profile example of how an industry can change and evolve and make sure that we're doing things legally and sustainably and with communities and indigenous communities in particular in mind. So it was a really big opportunity for us to raise the profile again, the way Scott's talking about how guitars are a very specific way to get people's attention about why this is important. And as artists, we're able then to say, so like for example, James from Maroon 5, I think worked with Martin on a signature guitar, and after he took that trip was like, let's talk about the woods. Can we get it from the Petén? Can we get it from, can we make sure it's sustainable? And so if you represent artists or an artist yourself, and you have the opportunity to make a signature guitar, definitely talk to your partners in what it's made of and where you can get it from. And so we use this message across to our fans too. We brought it on tour. We call this campaign the No More Bloodwood because it was kind of from Blood Diamonds is the same kind of concept. And educating everyday people who aren't musicians about the wood they use. I'm looking at this wood right here wondering what it is. What's in your flooring, what's in your furniture, and et cetera. So just thinking about what stuff is made of. We've been very good about clothing and food, relatively, but not a lot of people have been thinking about wood, especially consumers.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership in that extraordinary campaign. I think two things I wanted to draw out of that really stood out for me is one, as you mentioned, guitars are not the major consumer of these woods, but the storytelling ability of artists enabled you to win something that was otherwise going to be hard. So it's not only the storytelling ability, but the fan base, and that's something that I think we're all very aware of, that extraordinary power that we need to, in the current moment that we're in, think really deeply about how we can deploy more often, not just on this issue. And I think the other thing that really stuck with me is the the power of taking the artist to see the specifics of what was being done, good and bad, and then that story then becoming a part of their story that they could tell. And I think quite often these problems can feel very abstract, and that's harder for an artist to speak to. But when you are with a community, playing music with a community and seeing them making the guitar shapes, that really changes that. And if that's something at Murmur we look for all the time in every place that an artist tours, what are the stories that we could help them find that would help them then go on and tell more stories themselves. I'm going to move on. So we've heard the problem. We've heard a campaigning artist response to that problem. I'm really interested to hear how the industry is responding. So I'm going to start with Scott. Can you tell us how you at Taylor are responding to the challenges that having less access to these woods is bringing to you?
So this is the music industry, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with 12-step programs. The first step to any 12-step program is recognizing you have a problem. And I think, to be honest, most in musical instrument manufacturing are still deeply embedded on step one. There are other companies, Martin, Taylor, there are others I could name, who are maybe on step 4 or 5. My point is that we're still kind of early stage here. We are a craftsman industry that is very mired in tradition, and it's difficult for us to change. John and I were talking how both of our companies have made an eco guitar. Like, this guitar is the eco guitar. And I always really struggled with that concept, because if this is the eco guitar, what does that say about all your other guitars? And it's also traditionally marketing nonsense. I think it's much more serious to really look at your flow of woods that you're coming in. I'm not really sure I remember the question you asked me specifically.
What are guitar companies doing
What are you
about
doing?
it?
What are we doing?
What's your innovation response to this
Super
challenge?
quickly, Taylor has got 3 flagship programs. We've got the Ebony Project in Cameroon. We were just featured on CNN International. It's been written about in National Geographic. We've planted 60,000 ebony trees in the buffer zone around a World Heritage Site. We planted about 40,000 fruit trees because we're dealing with Baka people who food insecurity is a major issue. In Hawaii, we have a major reforestation program. We're trying to pioneer urban wood. I will tell you, and I think John thinks this is fair, that Taylor has an advantage. You've got Fender and Gibson, the two biggest electrics. You got Martin and Taylor, the biggest 2 acoustics. These guys became famous a long time ago, and their bass, how dare you mess with the guitar that Patsy Cline played at the Grand Ole Opry in 1962, or that Jimmy Page played at Altamont, or how people freak out. I have a friend at Fender, they changed the screws on their pick guard on a Stratocaster. I mean, who would notice that? People did, and they complained. Taylor started in 1974. We had nothing to lose. We didn't know any better. We constantly innovated. So if you just happen to like a Taylor, which again is if you like chocolate as opposed to vanilla, I mean, pick the one you like. Our customer base expects us to innovate. We've introduced a lot of new tone woods. Martin is kind of leading the way, looking at a lot of alternative materials. Taylor tends to look at alternative tone woods. We introduced variegated ebony fingerboards. For hundreds of years, the market would only accept jet black ebony fingerboards for violins and cellos and guitars. But in nature, nobody knows. 50% of the ebony trees don't have a jet black heartwood. The only way to tell is to fell it, look at it. If it's variegated, they left it. So I'll just say since World War II, they started logging in the Congo Basin in earnest in World War II. So let's just be conservative and say 1950. From 1950 up until about 15 years ago, 50% of the ebony that was felled, because they use it for musical instruments and for a few knife handles and a few little bits and bobs, 50% of the ebony that was felled was looked at. There was a law in Cameroon. You can't even bring that tree to the port because the international market doesn't want it. The international market didn't know any better. So we broke tradition and introduced variegated ebony fingerboards. And we took a lot of abuse for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Now the industry, the story is known, the industry has accepted. You can see any guitar manufacturer using variegated ebony fingerboards. The difference
maybe
is,
you explain to them a little bit more about variegated.
variegated is just black versus stripy. It looks like it's got white, stripy, milky patterns in it or something like that. That's what the forest gives us. 50% of the time, it's not jet black heartwood. It's a variegated black with white stripes in it. There's no mechanical difference. There's no acoustic difference. There's a 100% aesthetic difference. If you want a black one, that's fine. The world's filled with black fingerboards. But we're not going to let 50% of the trees that get cut in the Congo Basin rot on the forest floor. You could say over vanity, if you want to be dramatic, or you could say because people just don't know any better. So we took the variegated ebony fingerboards and we put it on the 814, our flagship guitar, to signal. If we put it on our lower end guitars, people would just think we were being cheap. But we put it on our best guitar, and people freaked out. But now it's been accepted into the industry. So we just have an advantage that we can innovate easier than our competition because the people that just so happen to like us know that we've always innovated. And for some of the competition, their fans are really tough on them. It was really hard for some of our competition to innovate. They do. Martin's innovating like crazy. And it's almost like tip my hat because it's harder for them because their headwinds are stronger for their customer base than for our customer base. You agree with that?
100%. I think it was well said. And, you know, the Martin family's been building guitars in the United States since 1833. We've been in the same family ever since. And our sort of flagship model, the D28, was designed nearly 100 years ago. And Scott is exactly right. When you're a very tradition-rich brand, you know those rules apply. How dare you change, you know, the nut width, you know, or you moved the X bracing underneath the top 1/4 of an inch. How dare you, you know, or 1/8 of an inch. But Taylor, to Scott's point, should be commended because they have really done a lot of work introducing and driving market acceptance on these woods that would have been otherwise left to rot, you know, or fate's worse than that. I don't know. And Scott is correct. Our current chairman, Christian Friedrich Martin IV, has a joke that he says around the factory all the time. I don't want my daughter going to the NAMM show, which is the music industry's big trade show. I don't want my daughter going to the NAMM show wearing a T-shirt that says, "My dad cut down the last tree." So we have been very forward thinking with the use of alternative materials. So we have a line of guitars called the X guitars, which is almost 30 years old. And at the time, I'm sure our fans were howling that we introduced a guitar that was made out of a high-pressure laminate. How dare you make a Martin guitar with high-pressure laminate? It should only have Brazilian rosewood or what have you. We have used tens of thousands of fingerboards have been made out of Richlight, which is a paper. We don't have time to get through it, but it's an alternative material to replace those jet black ebony fingerboards, and we find it works well. And we have dabbled in alternative species, but I think you mentioned this earlier. You know, every guitar company in the world has tried an eco guitar, and when you try and do an eco guitar, the guitar players say, "Well, yeah, that's the also ran. It's less than. It's different." And so one of the challenges that we've tried to overcome over the last couple of years is instead of just taking our traditional shapes, and we are the tradition folks, you know, with the designs going back 100 years, we have found that we can't simply take the same guitar shapes, sizes, bracing patterns, what have you, and just substitute out different ingredients. We'll take the D28 and make it with something else. Well, it's kind of not a D28 anymore because the 28 in our nomenclature actually means rosewood. So our vice president of product, Fred Green, said, we really have to rethink these from the ground up, and we can't just substitute the woods. We have to redesign the guitar around the features of the woods we're going to use. So a couple of years ago, Mr. Martin challenged our product team with designing an all-domestic hardwood series of guitars we call the Inception. And one other thing I want to point out is we view this as an and, not an or, because if we stopped making our standard stuff today, we would be out of business very quickly. But we try and do all those things, and we do all those things in the most sustainable, legally best way possible. But the Inception guitar has been a very interesting project, and we had to rethink that from the ground up to put different features and bracing patterns in there to play well with the different species of woods, because some woods are harder than others, some are softer than others, and all those different characteristics that go into why they chose those woods, hundreds of years ago. We had to rethink that to make it still sound like a Martin, but not be made of rosewood.
May I actually ask a question? Just listening to you guys, one thought that keeps coming to my mind is, have you done a study on what the runway time is for the companies? If we continue to cut down old growth forests or run out of these resources, wood is actually one of the most rare resources in the universe. We don't know anywhere else that grows wood yet. Have you guys looked into that? What does that look like for you guys? If eventually we do hit kind of a bottleneck of supply, do we have a time on that, or?
It's kind of a how deep is a puddle of water question. Wood is the most rare commodity in the universe, but it's not rare on Earth. There are certain species that have been loved to death, and the guitar industry has certainly used these species. Brazilian rosewood was largely a furniture manufacturing endeavor in Europe that drove that species to the brink of where it is today. We've always used it. Trees do grow back. I think we will always have wood. Wood is the cornerstone of every civilization and every human advancement since the beginning of time. And when the music industry starts running out of trees, then you're all in trouble. But certain species are going to become more and more controversial. They're going to be loved to death. And we're seeing CITES. John mentioned CITES. Certain species their use is getting more and more restricted. And that is why Martin is starting to experiment increasingly with alternative materials. Taylor is looking at non-traditional tone woods that are wonderful woods, but they aren't traditionally used to make musical instruments. So I don't think we're going to run out of trees. We might run out of the species that we have traditionally used to make guitars, unless we get our act together. And I'm an optimist. I go to bed a pessimist sometimes, but I always wake up an optimist. And we can bloody fix this. Just because we've treated forests like an ATM machine for the last 3,000 years doesn't mean, and we still do in many places, but there are some wonderful examples of responsible forestry on the planet. And if you find them, you can. Adam mentioned the communities in Guatemala. Those community forest reserves, if guitar players alone stopped buying from those community forest reserves, the government wouldn't get taxes, and that land would be converted into pineapple or soybeans in 2 years. So I'm less worried about running out of wood. The point of the species that we all traditionally associate with musical instruments, some of them are gonna maybe go away, and don't freak out and be like, oh, I want a Brazilian rosewood guitar. Well, maybe you can't have one. You know, but there are lots of other species that make great sounding guitars. And don't listen to what's been branded. You know, don't look at the name on the headstock. Finding a guitar is like Harry Potter and the wand. If you do it correctly, it will find you. But if you come with all these preconceived notions that, oh, I want a Taylor, I want a Martin, and it's got to be these species and those species, then, in my opinion, you're not doing it right.
I'm going to come in quickly and just say that I think what I'm hearing is a story that we hear in sustainability and climate action again and again and again, which is that we need to make cultural space for innovation, and we're quite a conservative species. Like, we love the things we love. You know, we think that there's a certain way to heat our houses, a certain way to power our cars, a certain way to get from A to B, and a lot of the story is that we need to evolve. And that's where music and culture is so powerful, because people are obsessed by the musicians they love and they will follow them, including on the question of guitars. So the reason we have artists on the panel is because we want to hear from you about how you see your role in all of this, but particularly in terms of, like, if guitars are innovating, what role do you think that artists are playing in adopting them, and how do you feel about these new instruments?
I'm excited, honestly, like you. I probably go to bed a pessimist and wake up an optimist most days. For us, playing Young the Giant, you know, it was a childhood dream. I love guitars from day one. I have a son right now who's obsessed with guitars at 18 months. So it's in the DNA. As being so lucky to have gone to this place, we're putting out our 6th record this year, which is wild. It's called Victory Garden. It's actually an ode to, like, radical empathy and, you know, understanding that, like, strength comes from within, and endorsing the things around you and supporting what you can is actually the biggest impact you can make on our planet. And one thing our band has always supported is musical education. I moved to California when I was 12 years old, and I grew up in Irvine, California, which has a very robust music program. And as we've toured this country, we've realized time and over again that a lot of our fans are musicians of some sort. They played in marching band, they played in jazz band. And we've also seen the story of, oh, well, my son's program's going away. And we really do believe that music is a good way to teach empathy. That's kind of like the flag that we're carrying at the moment, is trying to, you know, support music programs where we can, so that way, you know, whether it be like they fall in love with the guitar and they have a lifelong relationship, and maybe it's just to the betterment of themselves, so they have a hard day, they can go pick up a guitar, or it can actually teach critical thinking of, like, well, this song has a perspective and this person has a perspective. And so, yeah, that's, as a band right now, we're just trying to be ambassadors of, like, musical education. And I think putting quality instruments in hands of the youth is, like, one of the most important things we can do, because, as we all know, we sit with phones in our hands all the time. Like, you know, for me, like, I am so lucky that my parents bought me actually Taylor was my first acoustic guitar. You know, I shudder at the thought, had that been an Xbox or something, I may be a coder or something. So, you know, yeah, that's kind of where we're at as a band, is just, like, really trying to prop up musical education as much as possible. And Reverb has been tremendous in kind of giving us those avenues to, like, you know, actually fundraise and be able to have the language to talk to our fans and get that across without being, you know, just, like, too spoon-feedy with that. Yeah, you know, if they want to activate with us, you know, when we go on tour, we have a place where they can come visit, or we go out and do activations, you know, as, like, a treat to the fans. Like, we would much rather go and bring, like, 5 people to, like, a food bank or whatever philanthropic effort it may be, than to go to a radio station and shake some hands, you know. So that's kind of where we're at right now, is just trying to use, like, the good fortune that we've had to kind of, like, you know, get musical, like, education out there.
I think as far as supporting the innovations that companies like yours put out there, that's a huge role of artists. Like you mentioned, I want the guitar that Patsy Cline play. Well, then who's the Patsy Cline today that should be playing the latest thing? Because that's how it works. And so, you know, I went down to Martin recently. You mentioned the Inception. You know, I've been the one that's been like, oh, you got an ego guitar? I'll be the first one to play it on stage, whether it sounds better or not. But now, I will say, I think we're in a place now where there is no sacrifice whatsoever. I've certainly seen that with the Inception guitar. I literally went down to the Martin factory and said, line up the D28, line up all your flagship models, and I want to put the Inception against it. I was in a sound-controlled room, I played them all acoustically, plugged them in, listened to each one, and I picked the Inception. And that is made from walnut and maple here in the United States. So the technology is here, and the work that Taylor's doing. I can't wait to play. I can't wait. I'm here for it. I will. I want to champion that, and I think that's where the artist role can really be, because it's part of marketing. But if you're seeing your favorite artist playing a sustainable guitar, or a guitar made out of alternate woods, that becomes the new standard. And if enough people do it, that's the way forward. So I can't wait to continue to do that. And I'm playing next week with the Inception. So yeah.
I thank you, and I think it echoes one of the thoughts we heard from the earlier sessions about artist adoption is critical to these, because most of the times as a young guitar player myself, I wanted to play the guitars my heroes were playing.
Well, the technology is there. Like, I know there's an earlier panel about power at festivals and batteries versus generators. We do a lot of that work in the space, and there was a diesel generator that failed, and thank God we had a battery there because that's what actually worked. So it's the reality is people just have to get used to change. Inertia is our biggest enemy.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out too, like, you brought up Jimmy Page and the Telecaster earlier. That is just mythology in a lot of ways. He sounds like Jimmy Page because he's Jimmy Page. I've played some.
It's in the fingers.
It's in the fingers. It really is. It is kind of crazy. Like I play Gibson live, and I went down in Nashville, and they took me into the vault, and I played all these crazy ones. And guess what? I still sound like me on the guitar. Like, it doesn't. And I think that's like, you talk about, guys have been around since the 1800s. It's still a very young company. Like, and I'm really happy to see you guys pushing that, because in 100 years' time, it may just be a mute conversation altogether. Because that's where I was getting at earlier with the runway. It was like, does it really matter? Like, can you kind of just recoin the whole thing in this next chapter?
To retake a stab at your question, the time is now. 10 years ago, no one in the musical instrument manufacturing community was having this discussion, taking this seriously. All the change that we're reacting to is 5, 6, 7 years old. I was at the first Music Sustainability Alliance Summit 3 years ago, and I remember thinking, this is a raging success because it happened. It's not coincidental that we're in this room. And I'd just go back, Adam. I mean, first of all, thank you, Adam, because you, for 25 years, with Reverb and the work that Guster has been doing, and the work that your wife does, has been championing sustainability in live music. One of the earliest, if not earliest, that I was aware of. I was in the room when you were testifying in Congress, by the way, when I was a young hippie at Greenpeace. But, the point that was raised that, Jimmy Page played it or Patsy Cline played it, and Touche, you are right that what are people playing today? Because they will be the heroes of the next generation. And, Billie Eilish, what she's doing with the concept of climate anxiety. I've been doing climate politics my whole life. I personally believe she introduced a brand new concept, which is perfect for her generation, of climate anxiety. Like, how are people feeling about it? So there's an authenticity to the artist. And if they just kind of talk the talk and walk the walk and stay in their space, don't try to change the world, just model by example, people are watching, and people will follow, because the timing is right for this conversation. I mean, it's not a coincidence that we're sitting here today and we weren't sitting here 5 years ago.
Thank you, and thank you all. I think just some final reflections for me. It's been such a privilege. You're all brilliant storytellers, so I'm sure everybody feels that and has learned new things about woods and change making. But I think that what we've ended up with is really this focus on the artist, which makes me happy, because that's what I think about day in and day out. And I think we've heard the three different ways in which artists can influence. One is directly influencing politics and policy, which is something we have to do, because this change we need, we know, is systemic, and that's where systems change happens. One of the places. The direct importance of artists asking businesses to do things and also celebrating them, helping you make your new models the thing that the next generation wants. That sense, that's really important. And then really that last story about the fans and people and the extraordinary influence that artists can have. One of the examples that I use in the UK, we've got Harry Styles, who was papped being on an e-bike, and the searches for e-bikes went up by 60%, and then adoption of e-bikes went up by 60% in a couple of years. I mean, and as you said, that's just, it's in their own world. They're not trying to, no, but you weren't being a politician, you were being a musician who didn't want to press the wrong kind of wood against your body. You know, it's that things that are very, very authentic and real, but the system's changeability is, potential is vast. And I think you're right, we're all in this room because we believe that, and it's been a privilege to have your stories here. So thank you all for your leadership, and thank you for being here, and thank you for joining us.